Manx Radio.
Women Today. Good afternoon, it's 6 minutes past 2, and this is Women Today on Manx Radio. I'm Christy DeHaven, and for the next hour, I'm on the Conister Rock with my special studio guest. Before I reveal who that is, though, today, as I mentioned with Stu earlier, is International Nurses Day. It's celebrated around the world on 12th of May every year to mark the contributions that nurses make to society. There have been some wonderful quotes actually posted online about nurses today. Here's just a few for you. Nurses are the heart of healthcare. I think that's safe to say. It is the nurse that the child first hears, and her words, or his words, that he will first attempt to imitate. And another one from Rousey Williams, who's a nurse: to do what nobody else will do in a way that nobody else can, in spite of all we go through, is to be a nurse. I think those are all fair quotes. So this is an opportunity for you to name and fame, as we're calling it, nurses that you know. Tell us about the wonderful care you or your family have received. Those people who've gone above and beyond to ease your pain, plump your pillows and help a loved one in their time of need. Of course, we're not just referring to women here. As I mentioned, there are plenty of male nurses out there too. Also this weekend, it's Eurovision. It's come back again. Something I will most definitely be talking to my studio guest about a little bit later. Performers this year in Kiev include a dancing gorilla and a man wearing a horse head standing on a ladder. Eurovision, how we love you. So if you want to let us know if you're going to be watching the musical Kitsch Fest this weekend, you can text 166 177 or email studio@manxradio.com. And also, as I said to Stu before, in light of other commentators who've been saying over the past few days that the other nations in Eurovision think the UK don't take it seriously enough, how seriously do you think we should take it? Is it just a bit of fun, or should we be putting a little bit more effort in? In fact, should we have an Isle of Man entry? I'll be definitely asking my studio guest about that a little bit later on. So again, you can text 166 177 or email studio@manxradio.com to take part in anything we're talking about on the show today. And of course, you can ask my studio guest questions. So back to my Conister Rock castaway for today. I'm joined on the rock today by someone who's played a major part in preserving and promoting Manx culture, while also being an active performer, singing in choirs, playing flutes, whistles and piano in a number of different groups. She has a master in Germanic studies, and we're not talking about the parish in Glenfaber. Oh, no, definitely not. Spent a large amount of time of her childhood on a sheep farm, has appeared on TV with Boney M dressed in a bonnet, and I'm talking about my guests, not the band themselves, and has what I think it's fair to describe as an eclectic music taste. She's nodding, she agrees. We'll be hearing some of those music choices throughout the show. But first, Dr. Breesha Maddrell, you say you had to stop yourself from being totally obscure with your music choices that you were picking for today.
Yeah, fast am I, Christy, first
fast
of all.
Am I, Breesha?
It's really, really tempting. You're thinking, 5 tracks, it's really, really difficult when you love music to narrow it down just to 5 tracks. And then you think, I'll do these 5. And then you go, no, I'll change them. You change them around, and then you change them around again. And then you just have to bully yourself into just sending an email off to you so that it's fixed and you can't change it again.
And they are a wonderful mix of music, I have to say. How would you describe your music taste then? Do you think it follows any sort of pattern, or is it sort of fairly random and sprawling?
I just like good music, so it doesn't matter what genre it is. People will know me. I'm classically trained as a musician, and I play a lot of trad music, but I also play stuff that isn't cheesily fused together, but that takes inspiration from lots of different sorts of music or different countries and brings that together, and that to me is more interesting. So a lot of my taste as an adult has been listening to stuff that is a little bit sometimes left field, but not all of it is. Sometimes it's nicely mainstream, and it's just good music. And it might be that the vocal's stunning, it might be the song is stunning, it might be there's really weird instruments on it, might be a great bass line.
Well, we'll be talking more about the bands and things that you've been in, the groups you've been in a little bit later on, because they have also been extremely eclectic, which is wonderful. You say you sort of grew up with music though.
Yeah, there was a piano in the house, and it was just one of those things. I think both my dad's side of the family, his great-grandfather could play the piano by ear, and it was just one of those things. Unfortunately, I never met him, and that came through my great-uncle. He could do that, just sit down and play anything. And in my mum's side of the family, her aunt was the organist in St Paul's in Ramsey. She'd moved to the island, I think, after the Second World War, and they loved it. So we'd inherited a piano from that side of the family. So there was one in the house. So somebody was going to play it at some point, and I just was lucky enough to be able to go and have some piano lessons up the road from us in the Howe, just above Port St Mary from a very old woman at the time, Miss Slingsby,
What a
who
great
was, I think,
name.
in her 80s, and she was lovely because she didn't feel that you needed to be pushed through the grades. She would rather that you played for the enjoyment and the pleasure. So I did that first, and then I went to another great teacher, Jennifer Bird, and I went through all my grades. But by then it was fun, and you'd already had, you know, a lot of enjoyment, played loads of different sorts of music, and that was great.
Because that's something actually we've talked about on the show before, and you'll be well aware of how difficult it is to sort of instill that balance in children, that you know, you want music to be fun, but at the same time there has to be a formality in a way if you do want to progress, doesn't there?
Well, that's it. And ultimately I went on to study music, so I'm formally trained as well. But actually the musicians I admire most, a lot of them haven't got formal training, and they're great at improvising, and they're great at just sort of coming up with just a little quirky twist. And it's nice to have both, because if you have a grounding in both, or if you have groups of people who bring all of those skills together, you get something more out of it.
Does come to a point though, because I have to say I do some music, but I don't have that formal training. Does come to a point when you're with a group of musicians who know what they're talking about, where you have to sort of go, yeah, I don't understand what you're saying and I can't really contribute at this point, so you will do what you're doing and I'll just join in.
Yeah, but that's it. You have to just have the confidence just to do it. And music is fun, and music is about participation as well as performance. And I think that's really important. There should be something that everybody, either you enjoy listening to it, or you'll play it, or you'll sing it. And it's really good for you as well.
It is good for you. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But just out of interest, I'm curious to know if there is a particular either song, piece of music, or anything you can think of from when you were really young, that's one that really first affected you, that really sort of drilled into you, or was it just sort of everything that was around?
I don't know. I think it'd be everything. I think I grew up in a really strong extended family because my grandparents lived across the road, my other grandparents lived down the road, and sort of you're milling around between them. My granddad was the sheep farmer, that's a reference to the farm. He'd also been a butcher before we were born, I think, so he's sort of linked to that. So we'd be looking after meg lambs and doing things in between times. But music-wise, I was always surrounded with it. We'd go to Sunday school as well, and you'd hear music there. But you just have stuff playing, and my brother was always he's a couple of years older than me, into lots of heavy metal. So I'd like listen to lots of stuff you wouldn't normally listen to because your siblings are into something different to you.
And even heavy metal, for instance, is one of those genres that I think as a musician, if you break it down and you look at what they're playing, their talent is exceptional, isn't it? Especially the guitarists.
Great.
What they're playing is incredible.
That's it. And as I've got older, because when I was younger, I used to think country music was awful. And actually, there's some fabulous country music. You've just got to find the right bit for you in anything. And just if you can keep them an open mind and listen out for what appeals to you, because it is really personal. Somebody's voice will appeal to you and somebody else will go, I hate that voice. Mm-hmm. And a popular band like the House Martins, when I was growing up, I couldn't stand his voice. I just couldn't stand his voice. They were great songwriters. They're brilliant, but no.
It's true. It's like the likes of Bob Dylan, utter genius, but a lot of people, myself included, can't listen to his voice, which is, it's difficult, isn't it? But you mentioned the piano. There was another instrument that you started to play when you were young, but then stopped playing.
Yeah, apart from the recorder at school, I started to play the violin, and I thought I was really good at it. This is at Russian Junior School. But unfortunately, my brother was also learning the double bass at the time. And anything he did on the double bass sounded wonderful and mellow. And anything I did sounded really screechy, because the beginner time for a violin is really quite painful for parents. So I think I was swiftly encouraged to give that up and pick up the flute, which actually I wanted to learn the clarinet, but my next door neighbour started learning that, so I couldn't do that. So I had to learn the flute instead. So sometimes it's a happy accident, and it's been a really good instrument because it works for so many different styles of music, and it's easy to carry.
It is easy to carry, actually. That's a really good point, much more than something like a double bass, which I'd imagine is something of a nightmare. You mentioned parents. There'll be lots of people on the Isle of Man who will know, of course, your parents as teachers. Yeah. What was it like being the child of teachers? Because it must have created an interesting dynamic in school.
Oh, it's a complete nightmare. I think anyone who's a child of a teacher, you've got to project a certain image when you're there, because teachers, especially my dad at Castle Rushen, was the deputy head, so he's in charge of a lot of the discipline for the school, and he joined Castle Rushen the same year I did, whereas my brother had been there a couple of years beforehand. So I think I was introduced as, that's the daughter of the deputy head, I was a bit of a girly swat, so it didn't matter because I would just get on with things, played a lot of sport, played a lot of music, and just worked hard at things. So it wasn't too bad, but it can be difficult because,
So the other students, they weren't too wary around you then? Did they all
No,
sort
they're
of
not wary.
behave
They
a
just
lot?
get annoyed. So, but I had lots of good friends, so it was okay. But yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's brilliant. And you mentioned in your biography as well, and you just touched on it there, talking about the sheep farm, your extended family were very important growing up.
That's it. I mean, I think it's the same for a lot of people in the Isle of Man, and especially now when childcare is so expensive, that the extended family, parents think they've retired and no, suddenly they're looking after grandchildren, and that's the same. We spent a lot of time with both sets of grandparents, either sitting around at the beach or helping out, looking after meg lambs or picking up fallen apples and things like that, just bonkers stuff like that. But they were all really good and very close to them all, which is
It
nice.
does kind of raise an interesting issue that we've talked about on the show recently or over the past year or so, which childhood does seem to have changed quite a lot, though. Although you do still have that sort of close-knit community on the Isle of Man, kids seem to be staying indoors a lot more now, don't they?
Yeah, but not all of them. There's nothing like my nephew, who is still at primary school. He's at the Bun School of Gilgach, and he just loves being outdoors, making a den and doing this and being active. And my little niece as well. She's not even 3 yet, and she'll go for a walk, and then she'll go, no, more walk. And you go, okay, time to go home, tired. And she goes, no, more walk. So there are
Brilliant.
plenty of kids who want to be outside. And if you think about it, a lot of kids are outside doing sports, they're going for walks with their parents. We can get a bit hung up on them being on tablets and phones all the time. As long as you've got a mix of it, it's okay. And a lot of grandparents are looking after kids, and in one way, some aspects haven't changed. As long as you don't shut them in, never see daylight, it's all right.
And aunties are very important. I'm
They
just going to
are.
say that from
Mad
a personal
aunties
point
are
of
the
view.
best.
Mad aunties, yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. Speaking of the Isle of Man, I think one of the things that we're very fortunate with over here is that when exciting events happen, so when you get, for instance, TV crews over or big bands over, it presents opportunities that you might not get, well, you definitely don't get, to be fair, if you're in like a big city in the UK. So for instance, you might find yourself ending up on television next to pop bands, and you had an experience like that, which leads us quite nicely into your first song, Breesha.
Yeah, I had quite a surreal experience. I sort of had to wait until a friend finally found it on YouTube. And it
There's
was
video evidence.
Of course, there's video evidence. You've got to watch it. It's really funny. Because you sort of think, did I dream it? Was I dressed in Manx traditional costume, long dress, long apron, and a bonnet, in Cregnish, with Boney M, dressed in their disco bling, behind me with their hands on my shoulders as they sang, and we swayed with them. And yes, one of my friends who now is living in England found it because she was in it too and sent it me. Oh my God. It's really bad quality, which just makes it even better. There's a poor horse that gets dragged across the streams several times. And my recollection from it is that my mum was really intrigued about the guy in Boney M, what colour socks he wore, because he always wore these wonderful white suits. But he wore black socks. She wanted to know. She wanted to know how the fashion fitted together. So there were quite a few of us. And then somebody I know through Manx Gaelic circles, Nigel McFarlane, he was also in it. I didn't know that. He goes, I was in that video too. So it's all these kids. We had a great time. They were absolutely lovely. But it's the most bizarre juxtaposition of things. Disco bling comes to Cregnish and, El Lute.
Love it.
This is the story of El Luta, a man who was born to be hunted like a wild animal because he was poor. But he refused to accept his fate, and today his honor has been restored.
He was only 19 and was sentenced to die for something that somebody else did and blamed on Elute. changed it to life, and so he could escape. From then on they chased him and searched for him day and night all over Spain. But the search was in vain for Elute. He had only seen the dark side of life, the man they called Elute. And he wanted a home just like you and like me, in a country where all would be free. Though he taught himself to read and to write, it didn't help Elute. He was one who had dared to escape overnight. They had to find Elute.
Boney M and Elute. And the reason we chose that song is because Breesha Maddrell is essentially in a Boney M pop video, you could argue, to that song when they came to the Isle of Man.
Seaside Special, I think 1979.
Brilliant. And so we're going to try and find the link to that. You said it is on YouTube. So at the end of the show, we'll try and incorporate that into the blog so that people can watch it. And if you were part of that as well, do let us know. 166 177. There's been lots of opportunities like that on the Isle of Man with groups coming over. There was a couple of BBC Kids shows have been over. There was something on the prom going on. Michaela Strachan's been over, hasn't she? And various people as well. So all very exciting. Before we move on, I just have to say we've had a lovely message in about nurses. We're talking about International Nurses Day today as well. And I said if there's anyone out there who's special and deserves a mention, thank you very much to the person that texted in and said specialist neuro nurse Heidi Morris deserves a mention. So there you go, Heidi Morris, you have had your mention. And also, somebody's lost a ring. We'll be talking about that, as well as more conversation with my special guest this afternoon, Breesha Maddrell, in just a few minutes.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Women Today. You are listening to Women Today, just coming up to 26 minutes past 2. I mentioned before the break that we'd had a message in about a missing ring. Well, interestingly, it's Mike Porter has asked us to put this message out, and we're really hoping this is our old music teacher, aren't we,
It would be great if it was.
Yeah, it would be nice.
Yeah, sad for them that they've lost a ring.
But nice little link into the show, so thanks for that. The ring was lost around B&Q in the plant section at the front. So if anyone bought a plant from there after 4 p.m. yesterday, you might find a ring in there. So do let us know. You can contact Mike actually himself on 832-143 if you do find that ring in a plant. How completely random. I love Manx Radio, things like that. I really do hope that is found though, and do let us know if it is. So just gone 26 minutes past 2. My Conister Rocks studio guest this afternoon is Breesha Maddrell. It is International Nurses Day, but you're a doctor. I love that.
Not the right sort though.
Not the right.
Not for that.
I'm sure you'd be wonderful in a crisis though. Right, so you are a fellow Sheffield University graduate. I went to Sheffield as well. It was fantastic, wasn't it? You did music and Germanic studies, which is a really interesting combination.
It's just, I don't know, maybe I'd get bored just doing one thing. And it's nice to do the two together. They fit together so well because there's such fantastic music in Germany. But I had really good German teachers here, and it's interesting culturally and played such a significant role in the history of Europe. And just fascinating, wonderful poetry, wonderful literature, wonderful music, wonderful culture, bizarre culture sometimes. Pop culture's hilarious. So it was nice to do both together, and then I got to spend a year in Germany as well.
And you said that was an experience, I should add, with an exclamation mark.
Oh, yes.
Tell me a bit about it then.
Well, it's bizarre. I was a language assistant in a school, but I was near Frankfurt in the county, really, called a land called Hessen. And I was in a school where they were having a fight between the director, the head teacher, and the rest of the staff. So it was quite crazy. There's lots of nice people there, lots of bizarre things happening. Not much to do in a small town, but I just had lots of good friends in Bavaria. I'd just get on the train and go and see them. Lots of kids who came up with really old-fashioned names in English because they all had to have an English name in their class, and they were all called Randy and Doris, and you're like, yeah, okay. It's great.
Unusual.
Yeah. But it was a good experience. I think it's really good if you get the opportunity to go and live in another country, especially in another country where you have to speak another language. It does you the power of good because you start to see things from a different perspective. and actually being able to learn a language where you are then fluent, it gets you to see the world in a different way, because each language tells you so much about how people view the world, how they put words together, how they describe things. And yeah, it's good fun, but I was glad to get back to Sheffield.
It's why the likes of exchange programs are so brilliant, aren't they? Because if you get to do it when you're young as well, you know, sort of going through school, it really can have an impact on you. It
really can, and I think that is why it's so important. And it's great to see nowadays the schools, you know, going on exchanges with China and different places. It's really exciting, and it is the time you should find out about other people in the world, what they're thinking, what they're doing, and take inspiration from it.
Because although you have the internet now, obviously, which makes things a lot more accessible, there's nothing like actually being there and immersing yourself in the culture.
Looking at the architecture around you, just wandering around, listening to their pop music. The German pop music when I was there was just hilarious. Whereas if you rap in French, it's cool.
Yeah.
Rap in German, not so cool.
Do you know, I can't think of any German rap. I remember MC Solar was very cool for French rap.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful voice. But yeah, there was a group called Vier Gewinnt when I was in Germany, and they were comical. It was funny.
And we're going to be talking about, speaking of Eurovision, a little bit later on in the show, because that sort of ties in quite nicely. But you then went to St Andrews to do a master's before coming back to the island to do a PhD. And in fact, you have 3 degrees. So you're clearly a fan of education.
Obviously. Well, a sort of dithering, not knowing what I was going to do. No, I really had to do. The master's was, I think, that was sort of the year where I was thinking, oh, which way do I go? Because I was thinking, do I stay in academia, work in a university and become a German lecturer? And then had this opportunity to come back to the island to take part in a study that was looking at the way people speak English in the island. And it's all about language and identity. And I thought, actually, that's really interesting. I'm going to come and do that. So I came and did that. So just did a bit of a swerve and came back here and what did you actually learn from that? Because that's culture and identity. It's an interesting kind of, or language and identity. It's an interesting PhD title. What do you actually learn from that? Well, we were part of a team of us, and this is actually where I met people that I started playing music with. So Aileen Clegg was also on this sociolinguistic project. We were looking at how people pronounce things, what sort of dialect words. You know, you get all those wonderful dialect videos that you get online where they're taking the P a little bit out of, you know, our accent and how we speak. And the word order, some of that relates back to the Manx language. So if you say something's doing on you or something's at you for you have it, that comes directly from the Manx language. So it's all those links. And I was looking at that break from where there were Manx speakers, and lots of them, to the decline. And then the cultural revival that started at the very end of the 19th century, whereas loads of people said, we're not just part of England, we are actually a nation, we're a separate place. And so there was this wonderful flowering of culture and heritage and museum. There's an antiquarian society. They started gathering all the things that we've now so lucky to have in our museums, and they started to say, you know, what have we got in terms of our literature, what have we got in terms of songs, you know, what should we be doing and how do you tell people about it? And they got really excited about it, and that's great, and that just carried on. So I looked at the work of Sophia Morrison, who's just been featured at the museum in an exhibition by Yvonne Cresswell. And she was just this remarkable woman who's so determined. She's part of the Manx Language Society. She's teaching it to kids. She was making sure it was part of the guild. They were publishing books. They were having lessons. And it's like this real sort of importance that language and culture are at the heart of community. They're not just sort of things that are put on the shelf somewhere and just dragged out on one sort of day, that they're part of your everyday life. And they are important. And what makes you different and unique as an island is also really important, because that's your identity. If you can understand that and be proud of that, then you can understand other cultures and be proud of theirs as well and relate to them. But if you're insecure about that, then it's going to be a bit weird. So. Beautifully said. And speaking of language and identity and embracing other cultures, your next piece of music, I am not even going to try and pronounce. Well, I just pronounce it in the way that I pronounced it when I was about 17 or 18 when I first heard it. And this was my introduction to Peter Gabriel's Real World Records, and this was his project of world music where he got loads of different people from different cultures. He quite often put them together. He put them together with interesting producers so that they were creating something new. And Mary Boyne is a very famous in her world in Sami singer. So what we grew up calling people from Lapland, the Lap people are the Sami people, and they're nomadic people in the north of Norway, Sweden and Finland, and they're travelling around reindeer herding, beautiful, beautiful costumes, amazing music, amazing singing. And this is a song of hers which I will call Oppskrift for Herrefolk, and it's all about the importance of keeping culture and language living, not just putting it on the shelf, not just bringing it out on one national day, and that it's important, but it's another soundscape. And that was a nice way of opening a door to me to different world musics, and I've never looked back.
Og kalde for stata, hver kongeminister, beskytter og far. Send puta og handelsmenn, prest og soldater til folket som eier landet du tar. Bruk bibel og brennevin og bajonetta, bryt løfta og avtala, vær diplomat. Bruk lovparagrafer mot eldgamle retta, skap fordommer, diskriminering og hat. Og la ingen betvile din overhøyhet, sånn holder du nede minoritet. La språk og kultur få sin plass på museum, som forskningsobjekt og turistattraksjon. Hold festlige taler ved hvert jubileum, la splittes og dø det som var en nasjon. Og la ingen betvile din overhøyhet, sånn holder du nede minoritet. Og la ingen betvile din overhøyhet, sånn holder du nede minoritet.
Love that. The combination of that sort of funky, groovy bass line with the bonkers flute.
Yeah, it is. Nice overblown sound. It's great.
Oh, it's brilliant. So, Mary Boyner, are we saying?
Yeah, we'll say that.
Okay.
Somebody will correct us.
And I'm not going to try and... Well, I'm going to say, is it Oppskrift for Herrefolk?
Yeah, we'll say that.
Yeah, we'll say that. So we are speaking to Breesha Maddrell today. She's on our Conister Rock, which is also St Mary's Isle, of course, and is, of course, the site of the Tower of Refuge, which was, just a bit of history here, built on the island in 1832 under the orders of Sir William Hillary, who, of course, went on to form, as a result, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. There is a family link here, Breesha, I should say.
There is. My dad was a lifeboat man for all the years when I was a kid, as long as I remember, and you'd have call-outs and he'd sort of rush out in the middle of the night and come back and whatever. And then later on he was, I think, launching officer, station manager, that sort of thing. And he's gave that up quite a few years ago now, but gave decades of his life to it because it's such an important thing. He came from a farming family, but he also grew up in a village where there were really good fishermen who taught him a lot about the sea and about where it was safe around there. So it was something that he felt was important to do. And yeah, just admiration for everybody. I've got one of my best friends is in Port Erin Lifeboat, Louise, and it's such an important thing to do when we're an island nation, and such a proud history for the Isle of Man to have that connection with the RNLI.
And I do remember, because he was my teacher as well. I have to say, by the way, when I reminded Beth that your dad was Mr Maddrell from Castle Rush, and she went, I love Mr Maddrell. So there you go.
Yeah,
much loved man. But it must have been quite scary for you as children, because I remember him having the little beeper on his belt. What was it like when he went out on call? Because it can be dangerous.
They don't go out on a calm night very often. They go out on stormy nights, so it's already, not a good atmosphere. And it's a very sudden thing, because you've got to go, and they've got to go quickly, and it's the first so many who get there who go out and launch. But he was always really confident. They had such good coxswains with Portsmouth Mary Lifeboat, and so they had absolute trust in them. So you knew that they were in the safest hands they could be, even if they were in a dangerous situation. And he's always been a calm person in a crisis, which helps. Because,
and a great sense of humour too.
You know, they dealt with lots of really difficult and heartbreaking situations, and they rescued lots of people and lots of boats, and you know, they just do such a wonderful volunteer service. And I think that's through both my parents, thinking about actually what you do for the community and being part of that and giving some of your time voluntarily is really important. And I was brought up thinking that, and I still believe it.
And that ties in very nicely with the fact that, as we've mentioned on the show today, is International Nurses Day, and these people as well giving up their time and a wonderful service that they do. So we have said, if there's anyone you want to mention, we've had quite a few messages in. I've been asked to give a grateful shout to the brilliant Sue Wilson and her team of Northern District nurses. So there you go, shout out to that. Also, a big well done to senior nurse Karen Smith on the children's ward for her total commitment to all the sick children. That has come in from Linda. And also like to wish all my student nurses, especially Rachel Duff, who just missed out on becoming Children's Student Nurse of the Year. Congratulations to you for what you have done, and keep up the good work. So some lovely messages coming in as well. But our studio guest on the Conister Rock is Dr. Breesha Maddrell, talking about music and culture and all things around. And one of the things that you mentioned in your biog when you sent it through was how important to you it is. We've talked about, you know, sort of traditional music, but how important it is that it evolves, that music evolves. Tell us a bit about your feeling there.
Well, it's living culture. You've got to make whatever you're doing relevant to you now. So we've got a Bree youth movement through Culture Vannin, and the Bree supergroup, as we used to call them. They've renamed themselves Scran, which is only right. They can bring in other influences. They can play a bit of pop music or rock music and mix it in with it. They've got to make it work for themselves. They've got to write tunes that come from that tradition. It's like a long river, and lots of things join that river, but it's got to keep flowing. If it stops flowing, it stagnates, and that would be the worst thing. So it's got to evolve, and you've got to be able to play around with it. And I've loved that about traditional musics everywhere, and any music is play around with it. What can you do? How do you introduce electronica? How do you introduce samples? How do you juxtapose it with other musics? If you can't make it your own, I don't actually think that it's not in the spirit of traditional music anyway, because it's all about making it your own. And the singer I've been lucky to work with for decades now, which is quite scary, Aileen Clegg, and her partner Robert Kane, she's somebody who makes any song her own, and she's just got a fantastic voice that just almost feels like an instrument sometimes. And I think actually that's a much more traditional thing to do than just sort of repeating the notes that have been transcribed on the page. And so there has to be freedom, it has to be a living culture. Make it what you want to make it.
And speaking of that, you have been in many groups on the island and still are. And one of the groups that you've been in is Moot. Yeah. And you did exactly that with Moot, didn't you? And it leads quite nicely into your next music choice.
Well, this is it. The next track is a track that I only heard because I bumped into Aileen when I was doing my studies, actually, because she was a teacher and she was doing a part-time postgraduate degree on the same project. And you know, it's nice to listen to somebody else's record collection and go, okay, yeah, I need to listen to that. That's great. And she's somebody who's always listened to bass lines, and I never have, because I've always been thinking flutes are the most important, the highest thing is most important. And it forced me to listen in a new way, which was great. So UFO was just a fantastic band.
And this is United Future Organisation and Spice Spice.
incendie. Au premier rang du danger, toi espionne de ma vie, de ma nuit.
Oh, super cool and groovy sounds there of United Future Organisation, otherwise known as UFO. And that is the third choice from our studio guest this afternoon, Breesha Maddrell. That is a track called Spice. That is a wonderful piece, and it's just so eclectic. Fantastic stuff. Yeah, it really is. Now, we described you at the end of yesterday's show, Breesha, as a local musician and preserver and protector of Manx culture. How accurate would you say that description is?
I don't think of it as preservation and protection. I think of it as promotion and support. I want people to be interested in Manx culture, feel connected to it, and find it accessible. Because when I was a kid, it wasn't as easy to access. And nowadays, through the work that our organisation and a whole host of absolutely wonderful people who just do it in their own time, kids can find out about it, try it, like it, do it. And if you really get into the music or the language, it opens doors in other directions. So we've got some wonderful traditional musicians here who are storming the world at festivals, people like MacLear and Burrell before them and Ruth Kegan. And it's just, if they weren't doing that, then they'd just be another singer-songwriter or another instrumentalist trying to do something. It's because they've got a sense of culture and sense of identity, they can do it. And the freedom to make it new, because a band like MacLear make it new by mashing together so many different things, which is great.
And, you know, we're talking about sort of spreading the culture out there. We have also been talking a little bit about Eurovision, because it is Eurovision this weekend. You did something with one of your bands. We just mentioned Moot there that was sort of Eurovision related. Tell us about that.
Well, you just sort of find some weird things on the internet. And the weird thing we found was they were looking for entries for a minority language Eurovision equivalent called Lite Lavlut, which was happening in the north of Sweden, so where all these Sami people. So we entered and we got shortlisted, so we were in the final. So we were in the televised final, so we had to fly to Östersund. We got a grant from Arts Council, which was really nice. And we took part in it, and they had languages that were quite large, really minority languages, that, you know, there might be 1 million speakers of, but it's still a minority language. And then there were some people from the Russian-Estonian border singing in a language that 8 people spoke. So then suddenly you think, actually, Manx isn't that small. And so we heard some fantastic stuff. We heard the cheesiest pop you've ever heard from people in the north of the Netherlands. And we heard some amazing stuff. Guys who looked like Klingons who were just going rah at the microphone, and then beautiful young girls just singing in this beautiful Voshian language. And it was a great experience. It just showed you that there's so many different ways that you can use minority languages to sing different styles and have great fun. So we went to Östersund, we took part in the final, and we didn't win.
But you got to the final. That's the thing. And like you said, it's more the experience oftentimes. But I have to ask you then, shouldn't there be an Isle of Man entry? Because there could be, because they've opened it up now.
We've talked about this before, haven't we? We just feel, well, there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't, because the talent is here. But what a horror if you won. How much would it cost you to do that?
To
put
host
that on?
Eurovision.
But also, you just can't help but feeling that there could be a Father Ted moment there.
Surely
and
not.
that would make it for me.
It probably would, I can imagine. Now, you mentioned as well the language. As someone who has the background that you have, how does it feel to you now to walk down a street and hear kids speaking in Manx together?
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic, because when I was a kid, I didn't learn Manx. There was a wonderful Manx speaker called Leslie Quirk who came to my grand's house and tried to teach people from our village little bits in Manx, and I just sort of earwigged a bit of that. And it's when I came back from uni that I was able to learn it. But now there's just kids all over who know it, confidently introduce stuff in Manx to them, and it's a living language. And I use Manx more often than I use German, which is hilarious, really. But then I'm in the Isle of Man.
So it makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense.
Do you think we'll ever get to a point where we're more like other Celtic brothers and sisters like Wales and actually be speaking it really quite regularly?
Well, Welsh is a completely different situation, even to Ireland and Scotland, and they've got good populations of Gaelic and Gaelic speakers. Wales has got really strong native speaker, and they've used the language in a lot of pop music as well. You know, you've got lots of bands who'll sing in it, and that's a great thing to, I think, if we just can grow numbers and grow interest in it, because even if you just can understand people say Moramai or Fastamai or listen to it on the radio, that's a great way in. You're already connected to it. But the language gives you an in to the place names, to the way people speak here, to even some of the personal names, and it gives you an insight into how we relate to the world.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Okay, let's hear a little bit of your fourth track, which is an interesting collaboration between two people.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's Robert Plant and Alison Krauss.
Caught out running with just a little too much to hide. Maybe, baby, everything's gonna turn out fine. Please read the letter, I nailed it to your door. It's crazy how it all turned out. We needed so much more. Too late, the fool could read the sign. Maybe, baby, you better check between the lines. Please read the letter, I wrote it in my sleep, with help and consultation from the angels of the deep.
Such a beautiful piece of music. Robert Plant and Alison Krauss from a collaboration album that they did, which I've actually just recently dug out this weekend and I've been listening to a lot. Please read the letter. It is a track 4 from our studio guest this afternoon, Breesha Maddrell. Just tell us briefly why you chose that one, Breesha.
It was a track, well, a whole album, Raising Sounds, that I listened to on repeat as I was notating a collection of music called Ceolantia No. 3, and these are tunes that people like Katie Lawrence, David Kilgallen have written, and it's the next bit of the tradition show, and it's a living tradition, so traditional tunes that I was writing out, and I just listened to it, and it was so soothing and beautiful and very different to what I was actually transcribing. So it fitted together.
Absolutely. Wonderful stuff. And in a few minutes, we'll be hearing the final track and also speaking to Alex to find out what's coming up in the big show this afternoon.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Women Today. And it is just coming up to 5 minutes to 3 on Women's Day. We've been talking about the fact it's International Nurses Day, taking any shout outs from people who you want to just sort of, name and fame them, we've been calling it. So shout out to my sister-in-law, Milena Karakosh, I'm going to say it. I don't know if that's the correct spelling. It's a nurse at a correct pronunciation, nurse at Nobles, who stayed by our side when my wife was giving birth last year. And that is from Dodsey. Lovely messages coming in for the nurses today. Alex,
Hello.
You're excited about your show this afternoon.
I am very excited, and yes, a double thank you to Milena. I know Milena, and yes, all the nurses up there who helped me when I had a very interesting appendix operation, but we won't go there. On the show this afternoon, McClear are joining me. Yes, you're
okay,
jealous,
I'm
aren't
jealous
you?
now.
Yeah,
yes,
I know.
I'm jealous.
This is ahead of their performance this coming weekend at Cyclefest up at Milntown, sponsored by Culture Van. And there we go, I get a pat on the back by Breesha.
Well done.
And
Didn't
the
deny.
Arts Council as well. Also, on the show this afternoon, it's all your requests from 4 o'clock. We're also talking about what you could spend 650 million on, because Johnny Depp manages to do it, and the most Instagrammed places in the world. Number 1 makes me very happy. All that and plenty more after 3.
I can guess what it is
Where
already.
could it be?
Where could it be?
Yeah, you've got one of 6 to pick from there.
Oh, well, that's true. That's a good point. We have been joined by Dr. Breesha Maddrell this afternoon. It's been wonderful to have you with us, Breesha. Obviously, you are director at Culture Van, and I should ask you, before we play your final track, is there one thing in particular you can think of that you're super, super proud of with regards to your work?
In recent years, we had a special Honourgy of the Isle of Man and Cornwall at Europe's largest Celtic festival in Lorient, and we had the most amazing show. And there were various people there, but I think it was Paul Moulton who started the standing ovation. It was just a brilliant show. We had no rehearsal time, so everybody was on edge because the Cornish stole the time and the show had overrun before. But we put on this absolutely streamlined performance. It was amazing. It had dancers from Nefani. It had Met Clear as a house band, so a nice little link. It had Kurjan Kujic Choir. It had Ruth Kegan singing. It had lots of different people, and it had Russian Silver Band as well. And it was this big celebration of Isle of Man and Manx culture. And we repeated it at the Gaiety, and it was a sellout again, and it was just fantastic. It was a really proud moment to think, actually, this little island punches above its weight with arts and culture.
It really does. And you made me excited earlier because you mentioned about repeat, and I thought you were saying you're repeating it again, but I've missed the boat, haven't I?
Yeah,
I
we
don't
did
know.
it last July.
Oh, speaking of boats, that ties in quite nicely
does.
with your final choice of track today, Breesha.
Yeah, this is one of these people you've listened to a voice sometimes and you think, that's something new, that's something amazing. I could listen to that woman sing so many different songs. This is Rhianna Connolly, and we're so lucky we've got her coming in the summer in July for Incrunic Presents Celt Fest. And this is with one of her bands. She plays with Afro Celt Sound System. She's been in the Royal Albert Hall. She's been everywhere. And this is with Honey Feet.
This is Honey Feet and Little Boat. And just to let you know that on Monday, we'll be talking about Parkinson's at the start of the Islands Awareness Week. Our guest is a woman whose husband died of the disease, and someone from the UK is hoping to get in touch with someone who originally came from the island. Will you be able to help? But as our final track from our Conister Rocks guest this afternoon, Breesha Maddrell, this is Honey Feet and Little Boat.
That little boat, that little boat, that little boat, that little boat. It's bobbing all along the way. It's bobbing all along the way. That little boat, 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 that little boat. But something caught upon the line. Something caught upon the line. That little boat, 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 that little boat. It blew them over all the way. It blew them over all the way. That little boat, 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 that little boat. Now they're crashing on the foam. Now they're crashing on the foam. That little boat, 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 that little boat.
Women Today, brought to you by citywing.com for your next flight away.